There is a road steep and thorny, with perils of every kind, but yet a road, and it leads to the very heart of the universe. Now, the road is obviously a metaphor for a way of life. But how could any way of life, how could any road lead to the very heart of the universe? Such a statement will not seem so impossible, perhaps, if we consider a theosophical view of what a human being really is and how we change and develop and evolve over time. And I'm going to say a few things that are really quite obvious, but I don't think we consider it very often. The obvious sometimes escapes us, and the obvious is sometimes the most important thing. It's seeing what's there rather than skipping over it. When we walk in the street, when we walk at the lawn, on the lawn or in the woods, sometimes we don't really see the trees. Don't you think that's true? They're there. I mean, there's the impression on the eyes, but do we really see them, you know? It's the seeing that's so important. And quietness is necessary to see. So we're a complex creature, we human beings. We're compound. And as I said, some of this may seem obvious, but think about it carefully and see if it isn't more true than you perhaps have noticed. Now, clearly we're physical creatures, and no matter what we believe or think, we all agree with that. That's no problem, is it? But that physical creature that we are, with which we so thoroughly identify, all while saying we're really the higher self, is a complex, changing, constantly moving, changing thing, isn't it? And relatively every 7 years, there's not a cell in your body that was there 7 years before. Yet you say, I am myself. That body cannot be you, but you feel it is. How could it be you? Why aren't you totally different in 7 years? You can't be the body if you have that sense of self that is the same through many multiples of 7 for some of us. So we have an emotional nature, all agree also. But isn't that radically changing? It changes all the time. We're deliciously happy and we're sorrowful. We're having a wonderful time and get news of a tragedy. Or the other way around. We're sad, we're feeling unwanted, and suddenly something wonderful happens and our emotions are up. And some people are transformed emotionally, aren't they? Almost from one character to another, almost unrecognizable after either traumatic experiences or enlightening experiences. Different people emotionally. And we can watch our friends, and I dare say even our enemies, and sometimes see that after years we say, you've changed. And we're talking about their personality, aren't we? So our physical body changes all the time. Our emotions change from second to second, from year to year. Yet I am myself. Who is this? We have a mind, but that changes too. Constantly, with a stream of thought. And all through it, we still say, I am myself. Who is it? Now, the theosophical idea is that in that unchanging self, which the religions tend to call the soul, lies the greatest power a human being can employ. Self-transformation. No other creature known can do it. Only a human being. And that power of self-transformation lies within, as I said, what the religions call the immortal soul and what the Theosophical philosophy calls by a number of terms, one of which is the reincarnating ego. It is the observer rather than the process and the experiences. It is consciousness itself without enmeshment in the objects of consciousness. It is that which endures through all of the changes. And that consciousness, from the Theosophical view, inheres in the eternal, the very heart of the universe. Now, if it's true, we'll say, we might ask, why don't I identify with that inner self? Why do I really think of myself as my body and my feelings? We mostly think of ourselves as our feelings. No matter what we say, we do think that, we feel that, whatever we believe. Why don't I identify with that inner self? Well, we might just as well ask, why don't I understand and know and appreciate my subconscious? We know from psychology that our focus and sense of self often blocks our perceptions, doesn't it? It clouds things. It comes from a level that we're not conscious of, hence called subconscious. Could it not also be that the way we think of ourselves inwardly, not with our intellectual stuff, but how we identify, isn't it possible that that blocks perception of the innermost part of ourselves, the enduring part? Now, from a theosophical view, this inner self and the outer and as well in various ways evolves over time. It's not just a physical kind of evolution, but there's an inner evolution going on as well. And up to the level of the human being, it is said it's passive. I always say the fish didn't decide one day to get out of the water and have lunch. It happened. It's passive. It did not require the individual fish to decide to change, you see. But when it comes to our level, it is said, and I think there's ample evidence that this is true, nothing changes much. Everything is always changing, really, but I mean nothing changes radically or visibly or noticeably until we take charge. Now we have to do the changing. It's up to us now. And we tend to recapitulate the evolutionary process. Not only the fetus, which is somewhat similar to a fish and an animal at one point, they say. Maybe it isn't really a fish, of course, but I mean it sort of comes through that, doesn't it? That evolutionary process. It recapitulates in 9 months everything that went before in millions of years. But you know, I think we do it psychologically. After we're born, what's the first thing we have to get hold of? The physical body, don't we? That's first. And after some time, around 2 or so, we have to start getting charge of the emotions. We're recapitulating, I think, what the human race did in the past. And we were the human race in the past, by the way. It ain't those folks back there, it's us back there. So we recapitulate, even then, physical control, reasonable control over the emotions, and then, the more brilliant among us, control over the mind, mental development. And that's the great ideal of our modern Western society, isn't it? And most stop there. But the wise ones of our race sense that, as Walt Whitman said, we are not contained between our hat and our boots. There's an inner self that at first is only dimly sensed And that inner self urges us to change. There's an impulse within urging us to change. And gradually, that inner self, I feel, gains mastery from that level over the physical, emotional, and mental nature. It's Plato's charioteer, and the personality part of us, the emotional, mental, physical, all that, the horses. And until we get control of the horses, we're dragged one way or another by our feelings and by our mind. It's the inner self that finally is bit by bit by bit getting hold of it, learning how to utilize it and have it reflect itself in every action. Now, I personally believe that that inner self for each of us has a purpose. Not one perhaps we can put into words necessarily. But we're here for a reason, I believe. A friend of mine who has a very serious illness, life-threatening, told me she had a near-death experience when she was only 11 years old. She certainly never heard of Theosophy. She was in a dentist chair. They put a mask on her face to give her gas. There was no gas. She nearly asphyxiated. She said, I was suddenly outside of my body, and I saw my body in the dentist chair. And there were people there who were telling me, come with us, come with us. And I said, 11 years old, I said, no, I have things I must do. She didn't know what they were at 11 years old, but she knew there was a purpose for that incarnation, you see. And I believe that's true of every human being. There is a purpose. Now, in a single life, that inner self aims to or tries to develop qualities, to grow in particular ways, and it does so via what I think Mrs. Besant calls the law of growth, overcoming resistance. A friend of mine recently was talking to me about this idea of self-transformation, and I said this idea that we grow through challenges, through going through difficult periods and solving our difficulties, etc. And she said, yes, that's the way we change. Comfort does not beget change. Isn't that true? When we're perfectly comfortable with everything the way it is, do we do anything else? No. If it's not broke, we don't fix it, right? And then there's something else that happens to everyone here, I can guarantee. We are constantly faced with our own weakness. Let's say a person thinks of themselves, not is, notice I don't say, thinks of themselves as weak-willed and fearful, maybe from all sorts of things that happened in childhood, but now they've gotten themselves conditioned into the saying, I am a timid, easily frightened person. What happens? Don't you see, frequently they're going to be dominated by other people, aren't they? They're weak-willed, they get pulled around by the nose, and eventually, because I suggest that inner self is pushing, pushing, pushing to do something, to develop, they then get frustrated. They're so frustrated. And that frustration, which is psychological pain, eventually they might die before it happens, but then they're going to have the chance again, develop their own will. Sometimes it comes out in very unpleasant ways at first. They say no to everything. Well, it's a step, right? So that weak-willed, fearful kind of thing causes eventually the frustration, which then gives you the opportunity and almost makes you from within push through the difficulty, you see? Now, this process of being confronted by the consequences of our weaknesses, it gradually leads, in the long run, theoretically, to greater wisdom, to greater insight, to character development. And in the long run of the human evolutionary cycle, it's said, we'll eventually all catch on to the fact we got to do something and do it. But there is a deeper and a more direct route, and that only the few dare to take. Has ever been thus. Just as the evolutionary process goes in orderly processes physically, doesn't it? Quite clearly. Conception, fetus, infant, childhood, etc. Don't you see the possibility, the likelihood even, that there's an inner order of development as well? If this world is one, if samsara and nirvana are one, if the inner and the outer are one world, one reality, in different states, then the same kind of order should prevail, shouldn't it? But do we ever think of that? I don't think most of us do. And this more difficult way has been mentioned in most of the major traditions by various names. And there are clear stages in it. It is said. It's been called in China the Tao, in Hinduism the path of initiation, in Buddhism the noble eightfold path, in Judaism the way of holiness, in Christianity the way of the cross, and Plato described it in the analogy of the cave that I'm sure most of you know. The Voice of the Silence by H.P.B. also describes it. And she calls it the four portals. At least that's one way she deals with it. That we have to go through, metaphorically, again, on this path. All sources, every one of them, indicate it's difficult. It's not easy. It's dangerous. It's not perfectly safe and guaranteed success. But all sources indicate that if successful, the reward is worth the price. Kutumi said in one of his letters, and I find it of great comfort, there comes a point when it's all worth it. Now, when we enter this spiritual life, the biggest impediment, according to the adept, is selfishness. And we mustn't understand selfishness as just taking the biggest piece of cake. That's relatively unimportant, according to them. I don't say it's unimportant, but it's relatively unimportant. The real problem with selfishness is the inner selfishness, they say. And I suggest to you that all selfishness derives from the way we identify self. And we identify self incorrectly according to the philosophy and according to Siddhartha Gautama, who says all human misery arises from ignorance. If I identify with my body, I will act for what my body wants. If I identify with my emotions, I will do what they want. If I identify with my mind, everybody better agree with me. You see? Selfishness at each level, because I am that, I think. Once see that that's not true, then you wouldn't act that way, you see? Isn't that clear? I mean, it seems perfectly, I'm saying it's easy to do. I said, isn't it clear that that's what's happening? So when we enter this path, when we really mean business and we have that longing and we really are determined inwardly to absolutely pursue this way to the very end, HPB says, and it's my experience, not only in myself, but in watching others who've really meant business about this, you draw down more of your karma. So if you don't mean business, don't get in it. Because everything is speeded up. You won't have less difficulties. You'll have more. See why so few take the road? I got enough to handle right now, thank you very much. But don't forget, with every difficulty, there's a strength. That's what you mustn't forget. You mustn't think, oh, it's so hard I can't do it. You can do it. Because you're human. in speaking of this path to, I think it was to Hume, I can be corrected if I'm wrong, but in speaking to the path, about the path, the Hume and Sinnett, they must be forgiven because, after all, none of this was around then. It was all brand new to the West. They were curious. They did ask questions, lots of them. And apparently, Hume, I believe it was, wanted to just sort of sit at the feet of the adept and learn all these tricks and whatever else, and he thought that he was a fairly intelligent man and educated. Why couldn't he just learn from them? They could teach him. And they pointed out, you don't learn that way. What we're dealing with is not the kind of stuff that's learned by didactic method, teaching words. It's learned by a way of life. And they said to him this, you were told, however, that the path to occult sciences has to be trodden laboriously and crossed at the danger of life. That every new step in it leading to the final goal is surrounded by pitfalls and cruel thorns. That the pilgrim who ventures upon it is made first to confront and conquer the 1,001 furies who keep watch over its adamantine gates and entrances. Furies called doubt, skepticism, scorn, ridicule, envy, and finally temptation, especially the latter. And that he who would see beyond had to first destroy this living wall. Oneself, one's personality, one's ego, had to first destroy this living wall, that he must be possessed of a heart and soul clad in steel, and of an iron, never failing determination, and yet be meek and humble, and have shut out from his heart every human passion that leads to evil. Are you all this? And of course not. Now, the beginning of this path, though all that is true, I believe, the beginning of this path is not so hard. It's rather joyous. All of you who have meditated profoundly will know for yourself that the first realization of that inner self is joyous beyond comprehension, beyond words. Great joy, inner stillness, absolute peace, happy. Joyous is a better word. And it's interesting to me that in Christianity, some of the ways of taking it esoterically, and in the voice of the silence, it's similar. In Christianity, it's symbolized by the nativity. Happy, joyous, angels singing, you've got a Savior. Wonderful, you see? In the voice of the silence, the first portal, she says this, the road that leads there through is straight and smooth and green. 'Tis like a sunny glade in the dark forest depths. Lovely. Isn't it lovely? Now we found this wonderful place. You see? The second portal gets a wee bit harder. In Christianity, the baptism, an adult now, sort of knowing there's going to be difficulties ahead, you see, in the myth. In the voice of the silence, she says the second portal is also, well, she doesn't say this, the second portal is somewhat joyous. She says this, and to the second gate, the way is verdant too, but it is steep and winds uphill, yea, to its rocky top. Gray mists will overhang its rough and stony height and all the dark beyond. As on he goes, the song of hope soundeth more feeble in the pilgrim's heart. The thrill of doubt is now upon him, his step less steady grows. Now we can only give these metaphors now because probably none of us have been there yet. We've touched it to a certain extent, the first portal, with that deep meditation, but the rest is we can only talk in metaphor. The third gate reveals the full extent of the sacrifice. It's the transfiguration in Christianity. First time the figure of Jesus tells him, I'm going to be murdered. This is the end of me. I'm going to die. He sees now, the inner self sees now what the sacrifice really is. And she writes this, the more thou dost advance, the more thy feet pitfalls will meet. The path that leadeth on is lighted by one fire, the light of daring burning in the heart. The more one dares, the more he shall obtain. The more he fears, the more that light shall pale. And that alone can guide. For as the lingering sunbeam that on the top of some tall mountain shines is followed by black night when out it fades, so is heart light. When out it goes, a dark and threatening shade will fall from thine own heart upon the path and root thy feet in terror to the spot. The fourth and final gate is symbolized by the crucifixion and resurrection, the dark night of the soul in Christianity. In the voice of the silence, for on path forth the lightest breeze of passion or desire will stir the steady light upon the pure white walls of soul. The smallest wave of longing or regret for Maya's gifts, elusive, the path that lies between thy spirit and thyself, the highway of sensations, a thought as fleeting as the lightning flash, will make thee thy three prizes forfeit, the prizes thou hast won. For know that the eternal knows no change. You will know that from meditating as well, those of you who meditate. Because when you reach that inner stillness, the mind wants to say, I've got it. And instantly you forfeit your prize. You don't have it anymore. You either are it or you aren't it. You don't ever got it. Now you might ask, does the path wind uphill all the way? And you might hear the Master's voice responding, all the way to the very end, my friend. Yet it can be done. I've read you a lot of the gloom and doom. It can be done. This is what you must never forget. It can be done. Now, even if we take the broader road and don't take this tough one, I think there's one thing that's really, really important to remember. And I hope if you get nothing else out of all this, because you'll forget 90% of it in 15 minutes. That's the way human beings are. I'm not talking about you. We all do. This I hope you'll remember. What we think is so important usually isn't. From the point of view of the inner self, most of our cares and concerns are, as Kutumi said, all like a mirage of the great desert. They're not very important. The modern thing is, don't sweat the small stuff, and it's all small stuff. Leadbeater once said, perhaps quoting someone else, few things matter much. Most things don't matter at all. I try to remember that when I get too excited about something. I don't always succeed. Ask my wife. But I try. What's important in the long run is what we learn, how much we grow in strength, in insight, compassion, in understanding, self-mastery. They're the important things, and they come out of the difficulties. Now, so that you will remember this idea of things not mattering much, I want to tell you a little story. There was a little boy who wouldn't eat his prunes at dinner time. And his mother said, that's a terrible thing to waste food. There are people starving in the world, and you should eat your prunes. He said, I don't want my prunes. She said, all right, upstairs to bed. Not to bed, but to your bedroom. And she said, you won't get any other dessert, and this was a naughty thing to do, and God will punish you for this. So in about an hour, there was this horrendous thunderstorm, and she thought, oh, I should never have said that to him. I mean, I really shouldn't have said God would punish him. Ran up the stairs into his room, and there he stood at the window looking out with his hands on his hips saying, such a fuss for 2 prunes. So the next time you think something is really important, maybe it's 2 prunes. Now, no matter which path we take, I believe we grow through solving our problems. Sometimes people have said to me, oh, what does this mean? What does that mean? I said, don't worry about what it means. Solve it. Do something. Push through it. So, solving the problem, as one Protestant theologian said very wisely about this idea of understanding what it all means, life is lived forward. It's understood backward. I think it's a very wise expression. So don't waste time sitting around, I wonder what all this means. Waste time and not solve the problem in front of you. Solve the problem. Years later, you'll find out what it meant. You'll say, gee, if I hadn't gone through that, I wouldn't have this strength now. So we grow in that way. Now this mystic path that leads finally to inner peace, and it does, is difficult. It's why so few take it. In one of the Mahatma letters, K.H. says, it's by a series of cruel punishments we learn, we get there. I wish he hadn't used the word punishment, because that implies a punisher. The punishment, of course, is the consequences of our own actions. That's the punishment. And it's a kind of punishment, but it's, I don't like the word because it has too many implications that I don't think the adept meant. But it's a series of mortifications, isn't it? I'm not the only one in the room who's ever been mortified, am I? Haven't we all sometimes felt absolutely ashamed of ourselves and wished we hadn't done something because we look the fool? But if we learn how to identify more within and let that go, and this is not easy, and it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of effort, and if you think you can do it in 2 weeks, forget it. Do something else. Go have a beer or whatever. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. But I don't want to in any way leave you with the idea of it's all so hard, I'm not going to try it. You can do it, but you have to mean it. And you can do it because you're human. I want to end with HPB's full statement that I began with, because she doesn't mince words. She doesn't tell you it's a bed of roses, but she doesn't leave you without the positive side either. She gives you both. Very hard, possible. Difficult, but you can do it. There's this difficulty, and there's that ability to counteract it. And I think it's an excellent summary of this. She says the following: there is a road steep and thorny, beset with perils of every kind, but yet a road, and it leads to the very heart of the universe. I can tell you how to find those who will show you the secret gateway that opens inwardly only and closes fast behind the neophyte forevermore. There is no danger that dauntless courage cannot conquer. There is no trial that spotless purity cannot pass through. There is no difficulty that strong intellect cannot surmount. For those who win onward, there is reward past all telling, the power to bless and save humanity. For those who fail, there are other lives in which success may come. in a beautiful poetic form, she's told us of the difficulties and also assures us there's absolutely no insoluble problem. None. Not any. We can succeed, but only if we do what the adepts frequently ask: try.